Argent D'Nur, the World Spear, the Sentinels. With Doom the Dark Ages on the horizon, I figured this was a good time to brush up on modern Doom lore. In this deep delve, I will be walking through the intricacies of a civilization that arguably has had one of the greatest impacts on the universe and to the Slayer himself. In the Book of Kings, aka the Ligris Argenta, the beginning of Sentinel history is detailed. The Codex, History of the Sentinels, Part 1, details the moment that the World Spear initially pierced Argent D'Nur. According to those texts, man may have walked upon the world, but did not yet speak, indicating the land was uncivilized and that the humans at the time were not self-aware. The World Spear struck the planet, pole to pole, from the Umbral Plains to Ironfang Swamp. The Sentinels note that the world itself was a womb, and that the Wraiths burst forth to spread life. We know from the Ancient Gods Part 2 that this is not a true claim. The World Spear itself is a ship transporting the Wraiths, and for a currently unknown reason, it crashed into Argent D'Nur. But it is this belief that powers the self-righteousness that led to the Sentinels refining their skills and defining their culture. The ship released an untold number of Wraiths, a small portion of what it truly held within the spear. From their passage over the world, they awaken the Ancestrals. Now, I will begin a moment of speculation. The Ligris Argenta mentions that man did not speak before the Wraith call. It also states that the Ancestrals, who we believe are the Titans in modern Doom, were not originally towering behemoths. It is possible that the Wraith call invigorated the early Argent D'Nurian humans into the large Titan-like Ancestrals, and in their wrath they waged wars for an untold amount of time. Over time, and through later demonic corruption, they became the Titans we now know of. This is also supported in the Art of Doom Eternal, where the Titans are towering elder demons of the Infernal Age. This may also be the lore explanation for why Commander Violin's son was able to power the Icon of Sin, because humans are the early evolutionary ancestors, the Titans and Ancestrals. And now back to the evidence. The Wraith Call either delivered to the humans their sentience, or gave to them a singular purpose, and that is to end the tyranny of the Ancestrals. Though the humans were initially routed to the darkness of sweltering mountain forges, man discovered the secret of the sword. So the Argenta proclaimed their sovereignty, and through their blood and sweat, they claimed dominion over Argent D'Nur. Their civilization blossomed. They tilled the lands, developed advanced agriculture, and brick by brick, they built towering cities. They chose their leader, a king known as King Ormero the Father. It is this time that the Sentinels chose to forever venerate the Wraiths and develop the Order of the Daog to appease the turbulent nature of the Wraiths. The Wraiths are not a benevolent species. They brought with them a certain hunger for chaos, and in their wake, they made the landscape of Argent D'Nur dangerous. Quakes and storms often plagued the planet, and this necessitated architecture that could withstand great forces of destruction. The Wraiths also sent some of the weaker-minded into a state of madness, though what that truly entails at this point is unknown. Argent D'Nur was also not entirely unified, with separate tribes of men remaining independent in the harsh landscape. What is known is that the Argentian society developed a caste system. Those coming of age to serve in the society chose either the path of the sword or the path of the alchemist, both of which served to honor the gods, aka the Wraiths. Although the Codex states that both the sons and daughters had the ability to choose their path, it is unknown if certain aspects of the Argentian culture permitted complete equality between the sexes, as there are no known female characters from Argent D'Nur in Doom Eternal or Doom 2016. Regardless, this society praised service and sacrifice above all. Despite their inherent strength in conquering the dangerous landscape of Argent D'Nur and defeating the Ancestrals, the Argenta were not without tragedy. In an era known only as the Time of Grief, King Etrix assumed the throne. This era marked the arrival of the Makers, of which the Argenta discovered that their mastery of sword and shield could not faze the otherworldliness of the Makers, that these were immortal beings in a mortal plane. A deal was struck. The Makers would offer the Sentinels a trade. The Makers would bolster the Argentian Empire, give them technology, wisdom, power, even strengthen their souls and spirits. The Sentinels would be given access to an afterlife, which, given the society of the Makers and their predicament involving the Father, is likely not the afterlife they believed they were getting, as the Makers needed a source of soul energy to continue their rejuvenation. Regardless, the Sentinels fully embraced the Maker's doctrine, and for that agreement, they would need to share this covenant to all of Argent D'Nur and the multitudes of worlds they would conquer. The Argentians entered a new era of peace, prosperity, and unity. The Makers convinced the Sentinels that their cause was just, that other worlds and planets needed the gift of the Argentian Empire and the Makers' influence. They lifted interplanetary ships to arrive at new worlds, expanding their empire and imperializing the nearby worlds. King Roan's reign marked the first known whisperings of Davoth, the Dark Lord, in which the Con Maker became suspicious of an impending threat that would infiltrate and ruin their mutualism with the Sentinel Empire. It is at this point that the Maker Scalaris developed the Divinity Machine in an attempt to prepare for the arrival of this prophesied Dark One, who would not arrive for many generations or centuries. The Argentia people conquered most nearby worlds and created thriving port cities like on Mars. At some point, the Beathian tribe, a subset of the Argentian Empire, created Hebeth. Hebeth was constructed within the subterranean depths of Mars, likely as a protective feature against the harsh Martian surface and against threats of invasion. There, a slipgate that led directly to Taurus Nabad remained intact. The fate of the Beathian clans remains unclear, though if id Software is to be believed and all numbered Doom games are canon, then the fate of the Beathians likely is answered by the Soul Cube sitting on the Slayer's desk, and from Doom 3. The widespread nature of the Argentian Empire showed both how ancient and powerful they had become, but also showed their hubris. In times of great strife, the Argentia leaned towards their pride or the strength provided by the Wraiths. In fact, even though the Makers dominated their culture and architecture for an untold amount of time, many shamans, or likely designated lowly priests, would be sent to the World Sphere and be judged. It is known that many of these pilgrims were deemed unworthy and killed, but those that were granted access would be given a powerful crystal boon with near limitless energy to charge their technology and bolster cities in times of strife. But how does the Sentinel Society determine status and who to send to the World Sphere? Mentioned before, those of Argent D'Nur chose either the path of the sword or the path of the alchemist. But what does that mean? And how does the government function on this world? According to the Codex entry King Novik, there exists a warrior leader, a patriarch, as only those of the warrior caste are fit for rule. Kings who are not able to fight on the battlefield are not fit for rule either. However, it is evidence that the Argentians recognize leaders amongst their hosts as kings in their own right. In the Codex entry, History of the Sentinels, Part 9, the Slayer is deemed the warrior Khan, and able to wield the crucible in his hand, which would only ever be wielded by a true warrior king. It seems as though lineage of Argent D'Nur is not required to wield the weapon, only they must be worthy. So the warrior kings are much akin to lords, such that the government structure is closer to an oligarchy. The Society of Argent D'Nur places much distinction into the warrior caste. Those that swear fealty to uphold Argentia's loyalty to the Wraiths and the protection of Argent D'Nur's warrior kings were deemed the Knight Sentinels, and were elite warriors among the Argentians. According to the Art of Doom Eternal, Knight Sentinels are considered the most prestigious group in the Sentinel military, and are considered specialists in demon slaying, likely due to the introduction of the Doomslayer. Regardless, those who are chosen to be Knight Sentinels are hand-selected at a young age and are subjected to rigorous trials to mold them into the formidable warriors they are known today. One of the most prominent archetypes within the Knight Sentinel iconology is that of the wolves. Many wolves are present in Doom Eternal, but comprise mostly summoned wolves. It is unknown the exact origin of these creatures, but what is known is that only the Night Sentinels ever possessed their own, as they alone were considered worthy of them. The wolves likely represent a core doctrine of Sentinel philosophy that a lone wolf must be ferocious to survive, but packed together is nigh unstoppable. These wolves were known to be bigger, swifter, and stronger, a parallel to those that were fit to join the Night Sentinels. Something interesting to note is that the Marauders were able to still summon their wolves despite being subjectively unworthy of them, and Davoth too carries his own version of the wolves. This may indicate that the bond between the wolf and the Sentinel warrior is an unbreakable oath that transcends allegiances, that it is the ferocity of the warrior that deems them worthy of them, or it's a lore plot hole. Only time will tell. On the other side of the caste spectrum, those that followed the path of the alchemist are not as well documented. What is known is that those that chose this path initially served to venerate the wraiths and help keep them at ease. In the art of Doom Eternal, the priests appeared to reside within a theocracy of sorts. Initially, they appeared to hold a ceremonial position and help develop technology for the Sentinels' purposes. The Order of the Dag is the only known order so far, and the principal members, Nilox, Ranok, and Grov, are eliminated during Doom Eternal. These priests uncovered uses that the soul essence might have and began to integrate it into Sentinel technology. So what is known is that the Sentinel culture seems to implicate the priests or alchemists serve non-combat roles, developing technology to support the warrior brethren, but do not engage themselves in direct combat. It is assumed that the Slipgate technology, Sentinel energy, the development of the Atlans, and other weapons of war were products from the priests. The Civil War of the Argenta, which will be discussed soon, saw the rise of the priests as the de facto rulers of Argent D'Nur after the Night Sentinels were ultimately betrayed. The expansion of the Sentinel Empire seemed nearly unstoppable. This well-oiled machine worked as the Makers intended, conquering worlds to spread the gift of the Makers. That is, until an unknown man arrived to Argent D'Nur. King Novik ruled over all of Argentia at this time, when Sentinel scouts spotted an unusual newcomer. There is no record or knowledge of exactly how Doomguy made his first initial encounter with Argent D'Nur, though if the Universe theory of Doom is to be believed, it is likely related to how hell interconnects through every dimension and world, and a weak point was found that Doomguy took him to Argent D'Nur. Regardless, the Sentinel scouts were intrigued by his arrival, and he was captured. Despite his ramblings, Doomguy seemed coherent enough to be restrained and taken. Though the Sentinels remarked that his mind was crippled, he managed to demonstrate his resolve despite mortal wounds and injuries. Eventually, the Sentinels became interested in his ravings, as they noted he came to the world in armor that is not appropriate for their environment, and that he carried arcane munitions. After persisting on the Colosseum, the Khan Maker decided to study the tongue that Doomguy spoke. This allowed them to decipher his ramblings, and led to the discovery of the Dominion of Hell. It is likely that the Khan Maker was never made aware of the demons in the first place, thanks to the Father's interventions in securing this information. Doomguy inspired those in the Colosseum, and soon the Trueborn Sentinels began to shout "Rip" and "Tear," or Karantuk in their tongue. They watched the Marine push beyond seemingly mortal wounds in situations that would cripple the bodies of those weaker minded. However, soon the tranquility of Argent D'Nur would be forever disturbed. Before an event known as the Black Star, likely referencing to an eclipse of sorts, the demons made their landfall by bending the fabric of reality and coming through large, fiery gates. The initial invasion started from the obsidian forests and the Argentian overlands in the east. It was the Alorum clans that fell first. The city of Talorum was subsequently captured. Once the knowledge of the invasion had spread, the Night Sentinels were deployed, and thus began the Unholy Wars. The Night Sentinels struggled with the demonic onslaught. The Sentinels were well versed with war against those wielding steel weaponry, but the arcane weaponry of the demons perplexed them. Just as Elena Richardson noted in her voice logs during the Doom Eternal campaign, the demons were able to overwhelm even the most advanced technology and weaponry. They utilized sacrificial tactics to overwhelm and overcome any oppositional forces developed, and any fallen soldiers were used to power the next generation of demons, all of which further amplifies their power. The Maker hive mind, engineers, and priests worked diligently to understand the exact energy mechanism behind the demons. It was the order of the day, those which venerated the wraiths, that found that the wraith energy and demonic energy were very similar. They discovered that this energy powered their bodies and their attacks, and that it could also be used to power Sentinel-made weapons. It was the priest's belief that this energy could be harnessed, refined, and studied to discover a way in which the demons could be combated on even footing. The Con Maker gave her blessing to the priests under the guise that hell needed the gifts of the Makers, and research commenced. The priests soon learned all the uses of demonic energy. It could be used to end life, but also to strengthen life. It could heal the sick, mend the broken, and make mortality a meaningless fate. Despite the positive ramblings in the Ligra Argenta about the uses of demonic energy, it is evident that the energy was absolute in its ability to corrupt. It tempts those to understand its nature that much more, but also slowly takes over the will of the imbiber. It whispers of a million possibilities, yet offers but one: domination. These damning temptations caught the attention of the Con Maker, who believed herself to be infallible to demonic corruption. She demanded a tithe of the essence and became enamored by its illustrious abilities. The priests were demanded to understand the characteristics of the essence no matter the cost, and they became obsessed with it. On the battlefield, a different situation manifested. At the time, Doomguy showed how fearless and ferocious he was. A survivor of the Colosseum, he was granted a chance to earn honor on the front lines. He had survived longer on those front lines than any other Sentinel prisoner ever, and it was theorized that he either held a secret agreement with the demons such that he was spared, or that he was simply the very best against the demons. The Inquisitors of the Sentinel Guard, who could only be guessed to act in a very similar manner to that of the Inquisitors of the Warhammer 40k universe, took notice and became suspicious of him. Regardless, the signifiers brought forth a commission to lift him from the prisoner status and to be trained in the elite military fighting force of the Night Sentinels. This, without a doubt, led to considerable upset within the ranks of the Sentinels. However, given the severity of the war against Hell, any advantage was needed. The Doom Marine joined the sparring rooms of the Hall Masters, and yet they too were impressed with his unrelenting and unyielding rage. They remarked that each time he would be thrown to the edges of defeat and despair, each time he rose again and again just for a chance to meet Hell on the battlefield. They taught the Doom Marine the intricacies of the Night Sentinel philosophy, and soon he marched in rhythm with them, and in the depth of the war against Hell, became as true-blooded as any native-born Argentian. 3 separate times, the Night Sentinels ventured into Hell, and each time they observed as his disciplined lust for demon blood grew and grew. Based on Part 7 from the Ligra Argenta, the Doom Marine served with them for many, many years. While the war with the demons raged on, the Argenta society changed irrevocably. The presence of soul essence within the society led to development in innumerable ways. The Makers and High Priests developed new weapons of war, and the Empire grew and grew and grew. The Night Sentinels were vocal about avoiding the use of this essence, but they declared a stance of neutrality against the use of it. They would not dictate what their citizens would use, only that they must protect their citizens regardless. When the Black Star arrived, a large army of demons known as the Blight assembled to the east of Argent D'Nur, and with them they brought the Dreadnought, a titan so large and ferocious that none could stand against it right away. However, the size of the hellgates that brought this creature to this world raised suspicion as the invasion began with little warning. Taurus Nabad would be judged on this day, the Day of the Black Star. What citizens could do so fled north, but the city ultimately succumbed to the swarms. The Night Sentinels were pushed and corralled to the Blood Arena, an ironic circumstance given how the Night Sentinels were so against the Doom Marine's origins from this very arena, and yet it served as a beacon of protection and allowed them to cut down demons as they flowed into the arena. The prisoners, who served the front lines even now, stood armored with the very sentinels that guarded them. Among those that fell, there was one who stood infallible, the Doom Marine. This is the last Codex entry that mentions King Novik, so it is likely in this arena that he died. And though the swarm had been cut down, the Dreadnought ascended forward, and there was no hope to stop his advance. This is where I believe Doom the Dark Ages will focus, as shown already in the trailer. I won't spend too much time discussing it here. I suggest you take a look at my analysis of the trailer. It will be this moment that the Slayer is born, as Samur took the Doom Marine to the Divinity Machine and infused him with Davos' essence, thus creating the Doom Slayer that would then lead the charge and save the Sentinels, and not purge the Dark One. From the Holy Coffin arose the Great Slayer, the Time Walker, the Warrior Khan. He took the Crucible, a weapon only wielded by a true Sentinel Warrior King. Then the Slayer cut down the greatest foe to have ever walked on Argent D'Nur. The tides of war began to change. The Slayer, now a superweapon of gods and kings, took the battle into the heart of hell itself. Victory after victory was ensured. The war machines from the Makers fueled by Argent seemed nigh unstoppable. However, it was soon discovered that while the Night Sentinels and armies of Argenta were battling for the fate of the world, the Makers set forth to create factories in hell that would gather soul essence for Maker use. Unbeknownst to the Sentinels, the entire might of the Argentian army was powered greatly by the souls of their own dead, and this treachery would lead to a great civil war. The Khan Maker found that the creation of the Slayer was an uncomfortable reality. It was unforeseen by her eyes, and the Great Maker's singularity seemed perplexed. It was at this time that Samur seemingly vanished from the Makers, likely exiled, and made his way to Earth for reasons not yet known. Regardless, the Khan Maker took credit for the creation of the Slayer, calling him a holy relic reborn, set to smite the wicked and bring those worthy to the steps of Urdak. While the Slayer cut down swaths of demons and his brothers falling in combat, the Khan Maker learned to refine and purify the essence into Argent energy. Another piece of evidence that the Slayer was truly the sole leader of the Sentinels was that he refused to govern, for in Part 10 of the Ligris Argenta, it states, "The Slayer cared not for polity." This became more evident as he decided to stop speaking after years with the Argenta. However, as the years passed, the Argenta further imbibed in the tithes of Argent, so much so that a great schism was created between the Warrior King and the priests. The Night Sentinels and the armies of Argenta spent so much time fighting the demons that they did not realize just how disparate the citizens had become. At one point, the Night Sentinels sought to end the Order of the Six, an order of archdemons that likely controlled some of the higher functionings of Hell in the Dark Lord's absence, one of whom is listed as Erebus, who ruled the laborers in Hell. It was at this time that the Night Sentinels learned of the deal made between the demons and the Khan Maker, likely from one of the archdemons themselves under Davos' orders. They had learned that Argent energy was a refinement of soul energy, that which was taken from the fallen souls. Brothers in arms, who had fallen to hell, were then used to fuel the Maker's immortality, their weapons of war, and then also fueled the demonic onslaught. They watched as their brothers were transported and subjected to a vile process. The Night Sentinels learned that their very citizens, whom they had protected with life and blood, were the ones who built these vile factories. The Night Sentinels, knowing that the common populace would never believe their findings, hoped that their trustworthiness would be enough to sway the Argenta to forego their holy god and the Argent energy that fueled their society. The Night Sentinels uncovered that the demons, in return for funneling some of their Argent energy to the Makers, would be granted access to the menagerie of worlds that the Argenta had previously conquered. All peoples would learn and follow that the believers would be granted passage to Urdak, and those sinners would then be sent to hell to create Argent and to power the infernal machines. Thus, those that had witnessed this treachery and understood the transgressions against the covenant spoke to the people of Argent D'Nur, warning them that the Khan Maker they worshipped was instrumental in the doom of their world and countless others. The citizens found no quarrel with the Makers, and the ministers who spoke to those folks deliberated but instead found that the testaments of the Night Sentinels was yet another test of their faith. Those that warned the Argenta against the Makers were deemed heretics and cast down, and thus the Night Sentinels returned to the way of the Wraiths and knew that they had no peaceful path forward. However, not all of the Night Sentinels were in agreement with the original doctrines. Those that defected and remained with Maker rule were denounced as marauders. The Sentinels decided their path forward. They would destroy the Argent energy factories and Necroval, and they would liberate their people from the grasp of the Makers, whom they dubbed the Ascended Empire. The Sentinels hoped that the Wraiths would awaken and remind the Argenta of their true callings. But the Civil War raged on, and the Order of the Day, ever loyal to the Night Sentinels, had discovered a way to end the war. They had uncovered a direct path to Necroval, and the Doomslayer and his hosts of loyal Night Sentinels stepped through. But for the last time, for the Daig was never loyal at all. The portals that were created were infernal hell gates that scattered the Night Sentinel armies through hell. Their ranks were split, and the demons descended upon the isolated soldiers. There was no way forward and no way back. Hell knew that there was one last bit of hope for the Night Sentinels, and that lied with the Wraiths. So they exploited these lone soldiers, psychologically tearing them apart. It was Commander Valen, whose son had perished in these long battles as a Night Sentinel, who was plagued with visions of his eternal torture. The demons, in his isolation, promised he could be resurrected if Commander Valen relinquished access to the World Spear, where infinite wraiths slumbered. Valen, who would forevermore be labeled as the betrayer, gave up the last source of power that the Night Sentinels had. His son would in turn be resurrected as the icon of sin, who would absorb and destroy worlds and leave behind black holes to teleport them directly into hell itself. Isolated, alone, and abandoned by their people and their clergy, the Night Sentinels fought. When their atlas were drained of their last reserves of power, those that resided inside dropped to the ground to battle to their last breath. All throughout hell, the battles echoed as the Night Sentinels knew their end was near. Lord Sash, the banner sergeant, fought and died with his banner stabbing the throat of a great foe. Roan the Mighty had killed so many that he was blanketed in their entrails. Gore had broken his blade on the foes and killed many more with his fists alone. And all that remained was the Doomslayer, who, imbued with the power of Davoth, fought for countless eons. He scoured the dark realms to their deepest, darkest pits and drove the armies of Doom to the brink of extinction. Only by manipulating his rage and dropping a temple on him could the Slayer be stopped and imprisoned in the cursed sarcophagus. Those that remained on Argent D'Nur were scattered and remained isolated. Though they still carry the hope that the Slayer will return, what remains of Argent D'Nur is a ruin of what it once was. There are countless colonies yet to be rediscovered, and all the names of the fallen are innumerable. After being freed from the sarcophagus by the actions of Samur, now known to Earth as Samuel Hayden, the Slayer was unleashed upon Hell once again. The Slayer, by lighting the torch of kings and redeeming Valen by releasing his son's spirit, helped inspire the last of the Night Sentinels to charge into Amora to defeat the Dark Lord and seal the demons away for good. Though Davoth was defeated, the Makers, led only by the whispers of the Father now, may yet rule over what is left of a world caught between reality and doom. This is the story of Argent D'Nur, and I cannot wait to see what new details Doom the Dark Ages adds to this saga. May the blood on your sword never dry, and may we never need you again. Karantuk.
Against all the evil that hell can conjure, all the wickedness that mankind